Carolina wore more than 1 decade teaching preschool children, and there was learned to distinguish between tantrums common and the screams disguised as silence. He knew immediately that Renata's was not an excuse. It was a cry for help, hidden in few words. During the following weeks, began to observe carefully. Renata did not sit down. She avoided any contact physique and reacted strangely to simple gestures, such as, yeah, a hand in his shoulder out one threat. When he responded, he did. So with phrases mechanics, such as, yeah, someone would have given them to you, taught to get by. His body was always tense, like, yeah, expected a punishment that could fall in any moment. It wasn't fear common. It was something learned, internalized, accepted as routine. Carolina took a notebook, blue hardcover, and began to write. I couldn't to stand idly by. In that notebook, blue, Carolina registered each detail. He wrote without embellishment. He does not sit. He stands for a long time. The whole class rejects contact physical, even when delivering materials. Repeated phrases, I must not talk much, I must not move. Soon, the signs began to multiply. One day, while changing his clothes for a painting activity, Carolina noticed bruises in the Renata's thighs. The girl, seeing his expression, he just said, that was for not staying, stay still. The phrase stuck with him, nailed. It wasn't the first time I heard it, nor it would be the last. He wrote it, dated it, and then asked permission to the principal to refer the girl to the school psychologist. She was told it wasn't that simple. She should wait for the parents to authorize the intervention. But Carolina already had crossed the threshold of doubt. What was seeing was real, and what was not seen hurt more. Renata's drawings were other track. I was drawing chairs alone, in corners dark, always red, always with someone crying close. Sometimes a figure big, standing next to it. Sometimes nothing, just the chair. The school psychologist, seeing those drawings, he understood that there was more than observing. Although his system asked for proof, they knew that the body and the drawings also spoke. So they decided to act without waiting. They began to build a dossier parallel, with descriptions, drawing scans, photos of the brands visible. Carolina wrote each evening in his notebook, blue, like who narrates an invisible crime. The girl didn't say a lot, but each gesture, each reaction, each silence counted a story that needed to be heard. If this part touched you, subscribe to the channel. We need your help. Support to continue telling stories like this. The others' teachers were beginning to notice things too. Renata didn't complain, never. But yeah, accidentally tripped and fell. He didn't cry. He stayed still, like waiting for the reaction of someone who wasn't there. Once, upon hearing a voicemail, strong in the hallway, shrank in his seat, one he only used when I didn't have further option, and his shoulders, they trembled visibly. Carolina began to speak carefully with some colleagues. Some listened attentively. Others they minimized. There are children further sensitive. It is safe stage. Parents seem serious people. But Carolina's intuition wouldn't let her in peace. It was more than sensitivity. It was a pattern of behavior built with fear. It was during an activity in group that Renata finally let escape something else concrete. They were dramatizing scenes of home with stuffed animals. Renata had a teddy bear that she put in front of a chair, Red improvised with a box. Then he said, there it sits when cries a lot, until he learns. The other girls followed playing, but Carolina stayed frozen. That phrase couldn't be passed off as a simple game. At the end of the day, he wrote, activity playful, chair red, punishment related to crying, normalization of confinement. And below, with letters further big ones, it is urgent intervene. He decided call the psychologist, ask a meeting with management, and requesting a formal assessment. It was no longer a matter of intuition. They were seeing, hearing, and reading signs that screamed from his silence. If no one acted, would be accomplices by omission. Have you ever felt that silence can be more dangerous than screaming? If you feel like us, subscribe, and share this video. The administration's response, it was so cold as predictable. We can't act without evidence formal, they said. I could to be imagination active or a misinterpretation of their games. Carolina listened, squeezing the fists under the table. He didn't say everything I thought, but in something inside was breaking. How many times further needed see a 5-year-old girl years talk about pain as if it were part of the routine daily? The psychologist, however, did not give up. She suggested carry out sessions individual with Renata with the parental permission, claiming that it was part of the accompaniment emotional standard. Surprisingly, the parents agreed without much questions. Okay, if it helps him behave better, they said. That was also noted. The first one's sessions were difficult. Renata spoke little, but her drawings became clearer. In one, he drew himself same with a dress purple, standing next to a chair red in a windowless room. At the top two, there was a man with long arms and a face without a mouth. The psychologist didn't need to be an expert in interpretation, symbolic, to understand that this figure represented power, punishment, and silence. When he asked Renata if that man was her dad, the girl, he looked down and whispered, "He teach with consequences." The phrase was enough to accelerate his process. It was no longer just Carolina who insisted. Now there was a team. It started a protection protocol children, and they contacted each other, the services, social. It was the beginning of a battle long, but Carolina already. I knew I wasn't going to let go of that hand. Little girl. The day that the attendees social. They visited Renata's house and learned that everything they had documented was only the surface. The house was tidy, almost too much. All in all his place, like were prepared for inspection. But upon reaching the room in the back, a windowless space, they found the chair, red, metallic day with a slightly sunken seat. It was alone in the middle of the room, empty. When they asked his function, the father said bluntly, "It's the thinking chair." The mother said nothing. She just stared at the floor. The officials didn't need more. The combination of Renata's statements, the information psychological, the drawings, and now that tangible scene were enough to activate protective measures immediate. The first one's nights were difficult. Renata didn't sleep. She kept wake up, sitting down in bed, hugging her knees. Carolina, without invading, left the door half open with the hall light on. Sometimes I would come in to see her with a cup of warm milk, others only with an extra blanket. One morning, he found her awake, staring at the wall. "There are no punishments here, right?" the girl asked. Carolina sat down at her side, hugged her gently, and replied, "Here, there are only rules to take care of us, and never to make us damage." Renata nodded but didn't respond. It was like, his body will need unlearn everything I thought was normal. I didn't trust still in that new logic where he affection did not hurt. If these words made you feel something, please support us with your subscription. This way we can continue giving a voice to those who cannot talk. During the day, they were improving slowly but firm. At school, Renata began to draw landscapes with windows open, trees, and figures smiling. He still didn't speak a lot, but its colors, they changed. The psychologist noticed it and wrote it down. In his report, advances significant in representation, emotional, signs of integration effective. Carolina read it at night, sitting in his living room while took tea and reviewed her notebook blue. It was like see the reconstruction of a history broken. Still, there were difficult days. Days in the ones that Renata didn't want to eat, or she got rigid. Someone he raised his voice, even by accident. But now there was a network. There was adults looking carefully, protecting with conviction. And that, although it didn't cure him everything immediately, I started to do difference. One rainy afternoon, while they did an activity with plasticine, Renata showed Carolina a figure that seemed a little house. I had a door, 2 windows, and a crooked chimney. "It's my new house," she said. Carolina watched her in silence. "I didn't want to. I break the moment with questions. Do you like it?" the girl added. "A lot," she replied. Renata then placed a figure, small one, next to the house. It was a long-haired woman made of purple clay. "That's you," he said. "Here, nobody forces me to stay silent." It was the first time Carolina felt that the girl was not only safe, but it was just beginning to understand that he wrote it down that evening in his notebook, blue, next to a heart drawn in pencil. But the legal process was moving forward slower than healing emotional. Renata's parents denied everything. They said that the girl invented stories, which was manipulated. The family's lawyer tried to disqualify the drawings and the information psychological, claiming that they were not evidence solid. The judge, however, asked an external evaluation. An expert specialized in abuse, childish, reviewed all the material. "Your report was forceful. The minor presence. Clear indicators of physical and emotional trauma. The account is consistent and coherent with the symptoms presented. There are no signs of external induction." It was a breaking point. The system finally began to move in the opposite direction. Correct, Carolina was summoned for a hearing as key witness. Never there was state in a court, but for Renata, I would go where did lack. On the day of the hearing, Renata was wearing a dress light blue and a badly made braid that Carolina had tried. "Hurry that tomorrow between the breakfast and the nerves." I wouldn't testify directly, but was authorized to be present. He sat next to a professional in the area, children's, with crayons and sheets in front to Carolina, since his place. He couldn't stop looking at her. When it was his turn, speak, breathe deep. He told everything. He didn't dramatize. He didn't invent. He stuck to the facts, the phrases, the drawings, reactions, marks, the chair. The judge listened attentively. The defense attorney tried to discredit her by asking if they weren't misinterpreted, otherwise it would be projecting. Carolina remained firm. "I have seen enough, and if I am wrong, I prefer do it acting than staying in silence." When the school psychologist took the floor, she reaffirmed each sign described. He spoke of attachment insecure, of the reactions physical associated with trauma, of the coherence of the stories, Renata's indirect comments. Then they showed the drawings. One in particular, the one of the windowless room and the chair red, caused a silence uncomfortable in the room. Finally, the judge asked talk to Renata in private, in a room adapted for children, accompanied only by the psychologist and a social worker. They didn't record, neither they took grades visible. They just listened. As they left, the judge had the serious face. He looked at the papers in his desk, made a long pause, and declared provisional custody in favor of Carolina. It was not a decision easy, neither immediate, but was fair. Carolina left there without words, with Renata holding her hand, drawing with the finger in his arm a little star imaginary. The first days after the ruling were strangers to both of them. Carolina, although relieved, she felt the weight of a new responsibility. It was no longer just a teacher worried. Now she was the main figure in the life of a girl who barely was beginning to trust. Renata, by his part, it seemed, further calm, but not quite. "I was asking, yeah, could open the refrigerator without permission. Yes, could talk at the table. Yes, could laugh in voice high." Carolina responded, always with patience, sometimes with a knot in the throat. "Here, it can be you," she said over and over again. Time. Little by little, Renata began to try the limits of that new freedom. Sometimes pushed, others I doubted, but always came back with a look that said, "Really, is it okay to be like this?" One afternoon, while organized books on the shelf in Renata's room, the girl found one with a front page full of stars. "Can I have a chair with stars?" she asked, out of nowhere. Carolina was surprised, but he smiled. "Sure, we can do it. One together, yes you want." And so was, as was Borney Bench Project Stella. They used wood recycled, colored paints, stickers bright and lots of laughter. Renata decided that it would have blue legs, a yellow, CTC, and purple stars. It took a week in finish it. When it was finally done ready, they placed it in a corner further sunny room. Renata sat down slowly without looking at anyone, and then for first time supported the arms on the legs and said in low voice, "I like it here, think." Carolina did not cry, but her eyes filled with a brightness that said more than any words. From that day on, the stool became a symbol. Every time Renata felt insecure, she sat down there in silence, looking out the window, sometimes talked to herself, others I drew in his notebook or simply observed the birds. Carolina understood that that corner was not just a place, it was a statement. Here nobody forces me, here I decide I. He began to notice others' changes too. Renata started using colors further alive in his drawings, to do questions during classes, to laugh with her classmates. Once, in the middle of a group activity, raised his hand and said, I want to read my story. It was a tale invented but full of magic and hope. Carolina listened attentively, knowing that every word was a small victory. The report's psychological confirmed what Carolina saw every day. Renata was moving forward, healing from inside, not in a linear way, but constant. The judicial process for permanent custody continued his course, with visits, regular attendance, social and evaluations techniques. But in the meantime, life continued. They celebrated his birthday number 6 with a simple party but full of love. Renata asked for chocolate cake and balloons purple and a star-shaped piñata. When he arrived, he timed to blow out the candles, closed her eyes and murmured a wish. Carolina didn't ask that was, but further afternoon, while they collected the papers on the floor, Renata approached her and said, "I asked that this not end never." Carolina hugged her strong, and that evening wrote in his notebook, blue. Today, Renata asked for something first time without fear. In the following months, Carolina decided to incorporate a routine new. Each Sunday in the morning, they went out for a walk together by He Park. It was a space open, full of trees, wooden benches and games, children. At first, Renata watched from far away, with a certain distrust. He wouldn't go on the slide, nor on the swing. He just walked beside Carolina, holding his hand firmly clinging to hers. But with the time, that distance is gone shortening. One morning, without saying anything, she let go of Carolina's hand and climbed up on her own string structure. "From up," he smiled. "Look at me," he shouted, with a mixture of pride and surprise. It was the first time he raised his voice in a space public. Carolina applauded him as had just won a medal. That same one afternoon, while ordered books at home, Renata found his notebook Carolina blue. "Can I see it?" he asked. Carolina hesitated. For a second, then nodded. "Only if you want," she said. The girl carefully opened it, passing pages full of notes, dates, short phrases and small drawings that Carolina herself had made to record moments important. He stopped in a sheet where was written, "Renata said nothing, but her eyes spoke of pain." The girl caressed that line with the finger and then, with voice very low, said, "I neither understood what was happening to me. It just hurt." Carolina bent down to her height, looked into her eyes and answered, "And now, what? Do you feel it?" Renata thought some seconds and said, "I feel like I'm learning to breathe." Carolina closed her notebook, hugged it softly, and knew that those words were worth more than any testimony. The legal process, although slow, was leaning each time more in favor of Carolina. The judge assigned to the case solicitors a series of visits, home visits, interviews with specialists and link analysis effective. Each report coincided in something. Renata had built a bond of attachment safe with Carolina. He felt protected, listened to, and was beginning to show such as it was. In one of the interviews, the social worker wrote, "The minor identifies Carolina as his reference figure, both emotional as everyday, expresses verbally his desire to stay with her. That phrase, although brief, had he power to transform destinations. The public ministry recommended advance towards full adoption, while everything that happened in the legal plane, at home they were brewing small revolutions daily. Renata began to sleep without the hall light, then without the door open. Finally, he asked a star lamp for her nightstand. When Carolina asked her by what, he replied, "Because now the dreams don't scare me that much." He also started to help in the kitchen. He liked it, mixing flour, breaking eggs, and decorating cookies in the shape of moons and suns. Carolina found in those simple gestures a beauty immense. Every laugh, every flower stain on the nose, it was a testimony of healing. I wrote it everything, not for obsession, but by gratitude. Today, Renata hugged me for no reason, he wrote on a random Tuesday. She asked me to teach her how to plant flowers, he wrote. Other Thursday, the house, once silent, now had life in each corner. One day, while they planted sunflowers in a little patio garden, Renata stopped and said, "Do you know what I like about this house?" Carolina, her hands full of dirt, looked up. "That there are no punishments, only consequences that don't hurt." The girl said it was a phrase unexpected, full of meaning for someone who had been educated with fear. Carolina just smiled. "Here we learn together, and when something doesn't go well, we talk about it," she replied. That afternoon, in addition to sunflowers, they planted something deeper, the understanding that educating was not about imposing, but a company. He wrote it down in his notebook blue with a small flower drawn in the corner. Days later, Renata brought home a school assignment that consisted in write a small autobiography. With lyrics big and a little crooked, wrote, "My name is Renata. I am 6 years old. I live with Carolina. I like painting, the stars and the fearless hugs. Before I had a chair that hurt, but now I have a little stool that shines. In this house, I can be me." Carolina read those lines while the girl he was sleeping, and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. It was beautiful to read that, but it also hurt to know what had happened, had to go through to get there. Still, I knew that every word written for Renata, it was a firm step toward a life better. That night he didn't write in a notebook, he just hugged it against his chest and was allowed cry in silence, with relief. At school, the changes were also obvious. The teacher substitute, who before was barely, he managed to get Renata to respond with monosyllables. Now he listened to her participate in class, help their classmates, and even offer to read in voice high. One day, during an expression activity emotional, drew a house with many windows, one library, a garden filled with flowers, and a sign on the door that said, "Welcome to where it doesn't hurt." All the children, they applauded his drawing. Renata smiled timidly and returned to her seat. Carolina, who had been invited to the activity as observer, had to leave by some minutes. He locked himself in his bath, breathed deep, and repeated itself mentally, "We are achieving." It wasn't just Renata who was healing. She was also changing, learning to look at life from other place. The legal file reached its final stage on a sunny autumn day. The courtroom was not full, but he air had that special weight that they advertised the moments decisive. Carolina wore sober, but with tenderness. Renata in change. He insisted in put on a dress with stars. "So they know that I have light," he said. The judge, after reading the reports, listened to the experts and carefully observed the girl, signed the adoption decree, definitive. There was no applause, only a long, dense silence, followed for a thank you that Carolina barely achievement pronounce. Renata looked at her, raised his stool miniature, the one that had brought a symbol, and said in low voice, "Now yes, it's mine forever." It was his way of saying that finally, I belonged in a place without fear. After the ruling, Carolina decided to do a ceremony intimate at home. Nothing big, just the two of them, a small cake with sugar stars and a handwritten letter. "Renata," she said, "you taught me more than I could have imagined. You showed me that the courage not always screams. Sometimes just breathes low and still forward. This house always will be yours. This love, too. Renata read it in voice high with trembling hands. Then she climbed into her stool, Stella, and since there, he said, "Now yeah, I can think calm." It was a simple phrase, but full of history. Carolina didn't respond. She just hugged her tightly, like if with that gesture could protect her from everything that still was left by heal. With the time, they began to build new traditions. Fridays were story nights invented. One told the first part, the other, I had to continue it. Tuesdays were for cooking something new together. And the Sundays, walk by he park with stop mandatory in the big tree, where Renata placed a stone that represented something I wanted leave back. One day, he left a stone red, the most heavy. "This one is for the chair," he said. Carolina understood that he wasn't talking about an object, but about everything it symbolized. From then on, every stone left was one wound less. Renata's backpack, previously invisible and loaded, became further light. And, although still there was unanswered questions, the important thing was that now she didn't face them alone. At school, the principal organized an art exhibition children under the theme, My Place Safe. The students, they should represent a space with paintings, collages, or sculptures where they felt in peace. Renata worked in silence for days, concentrating, without showing anyone what she was doing. On the day of the presentation, she carried a model made with cardboard, fabrics, and magazine clippings. It was a room with walls light blue, windows open, a garden outside, and in his center, a small bench with stars. On the model, a figure little girl with braids and a smile drawn. "This is my place to think," he explained to the visitors. Most of them didn't understand he meaning complete, but Carolina, who watched from he bottom, had to sit down so as not to collapse. He knew what that little stool represented: freedom, dignity, and above all, everything. With the end of fear, the weeks passed by, and each time more people from the environment were beginning to notice he change. Neighbors, teachers, even the pediatrician commented on how different Renata was. "You can see further high. It is further bright. It looks like another girl." Carolina smiled and responded humbly, "I just needed space to flourish." But I knew it wasn't just that. It required patience, listening, real presence. One day, Renata came home from school with a plant that had sown in class. "It's called Hope," he said. "Can we put it in he garden?" They buried her together, right next to the largest sunflower, big. Every morning, Renata would talk to him low to your plant, like if it were a secret between the two of them. Carolina limited herself to notice from the window, with the heart full, and the certainty that the days are longer, dark, were left each time further far. If you believe every child deserves a safe place, subscribe. Keeping this channel alive depends on you. One afternoon, while it was raining and they were playing cards on the living room floor, Renata asked, "Do you think I can be a teacher too? Someday?" Carolina smiled without hesitation. "Of course, the best teachers are those who know the pain because they know how not to repeat it." Renata saved that phrase like a treasure. That same night, he drew a classroom with children, a board full of stars and a woman with a braid. "Like yours." In the corner of the drawing wrote, I teach without shouting." Carolina, seeing that image, he understood that the cycle was beginning to close in. Renata was not only moving away from the past, she was also beginning to imagine a future where she same could be a source of care, not just a recipient of wounds. During a revision annual meeting with the social worker, Renata spoke without fear. She said, "What was your life before?" without needing to hide behind metaphors or silences. He described the chair, read, the phrases I heard, the feeling constant of being wrong by exist. The professional moved, asked him as there was accomplished cross all that, Renata thought. Some seconds and replied, "Because someone believed me when I said it hurt? Sit down." It was an answer simple, but he said it everything. Believing a child, giving value to his words, can be the difference between a life of trauma and one of healing. Carolina knew it from that first day. In the classroom, and now, with Renata talking to that security, the importance of having been reaffirmed heard that whisper in time. Carolina decided keep her notebook blue in a special box, along with some drawings, one copy of the court ruling, and a photo of Renata sitting in his little bench, smiling at the sun. "It's ours, time capsule," he explained. Renata asked, "Yeah, could open it someday, whenever you decide?" Carolina replied. It was a symbol of closure, but also a memory. Reserve, everything they had passed, the good and the difficult, was there written with ink, paper, and heart. Renata touched the box with respect, as if who recognizes his history, but no longer lives trapped in she. "I want open it when fulfilled 10, he said, "and read everything as if it were a story that happened to him, to other girl." Carolina nodded, knowing that distance emotional was also a sign of growth. As time went by, Renata began to have friends who visited the house, played in his garden and sat with her in his stool Stella. They shared snacks, secrets, and even made up songs. One of them asked him one day why what that little bench had stars. Renata thought for a moment and replied, "Because with him I learned that I can be sitting without pain, the soul." The friend didn't quite understand, but she laughed and said, "Then it's magic." And it was, in a way. That little furniture built with wood, recycled and genuine. Love had been converted on an altar of freedom. Carolina them observed from the kitchen, grateful. Renata's laughter, now constant, was his music favorite. And although still appeared nightmares from time to time, in when now there was arms willing to hug her until they passed. In a end-of-year school reunion, each child I had to count a history significant that there would be lived. Some, they talked about vacations, pets news or birthdays memorable. When he arrived, Renata's turn, and she stopped in front of his classmates with a folded sheet of paper. He opened it slowly and read, "My story starts with one chair that hurt, but one day I knew to someone who listened to me and gave me a stool with stars. Now I can sit without fear and dream of being a teacher. This story is not sad, it is brave, because surviving is also a way to shine." The room was in silence some seconds, then all applauded. Carolina, in the audience, had eyes filled with tears. I couldn't ask more. Renata had not only found his voice, but used it to inspire to others. That same one night, while they were drinking hot chocolate in the kitchen, Carolina asked him if you would like write a book about everything there was lived. Renata stayed thinking. "Maybe when it is more big," he said. "Now I just want continue learning to be well." It was a wise answer. I didn't have hurry. There was understood that healing is not running. And it is walking at your own pace, rhythm with certainty. Carolina hugged her and said, "And I go to be here step by step." Then Renata took a white sheet of paper, drew a path with trees and a bench on the side, and wrote, "Here my second begins story." It was his way of declaring that the worst there was left back, and that what was coming was his, free and full of possibilities. The days at home became further light. The routines that were once therapeutic now were just everyday things. Making the bed together, preparing he breakfast, take care he garden, were no longer linking tools, but gestures of a coexistence full of affection. Renata no longer needed ask. You could open the refrigerator, or if was permitted, sing in voice high. He did it naturally. He even had invented a song to water the plants, and every time she sang it, Carolina knew that not only flowers grew with that melody. In a late anyone, Renata asked paint one of the walls of his fourth. "I want put it on clouds and stars, like in my head," she explained. Carolina brought brushes, and together they created a sky that covered all he wall. When they finished, Renata wrote in handwriting clumsy, "There are no punishments here. Are you excited to see how the pain in hope? Then subscribe to the channel. That keeps us going." On one of her visits to the park, Renata stopped in front of an empty bench. He stood observing it in silence. Carolina, who was walking a few steps back, he approached and asked, "Yeah, it was okay." Renata nodded. "I remembered the chair red," he said, "but it doesn't scare me anymore." He sat down on that public bench, under the shade of a tree, and took a deep breath. "You know, I don't think I need to anymore have afraid of chairs," he confessed. Carolina said nothing. She just sat down at his side. Sometimes it doesn't do lack talk. Just share his silence, knowing that in that space, don't worry, the greatest of victories dwells, living without fear. That afternoon, there was no rituals, neither drawings, just one little girl sitting in the sun, and a woman who understood that this gesture, in same, was a revolution. At school, during a special activity on the rights of the children, each student I had to write in a leaf what I thought was all child I had to have. While some, they wrote things like toys, ice cream, or vacation. Renata wrote with letters great. All the children must have someone who listened. Her teacher showed it to Carolina during a parents' meeting. "It's a little girl very special," he said with a smile. Carolina saved that leaf as a trophy, more valuable than any diploma. He nailed it in the refrigerator at home, and every time I saw her, I felt that phrase summarized everything they had crossed. It was not about money, nor gifts, nor not even opportunities. It was about being seen, believed, and loved. One weekend, they organized a small trip to a nearby town with mountains and rivers. It was the first time Renata left the city. When she arrived, she was surprised by everything. The colors of the field, the silence different, the sound of water running. One afternoon, sitting by the river, Carolina asked him that I thought. Renata replied, "I like this place because it is quiet by inside, like I now." Carolina closed eyes for a moment, let those words settle, and took her hand. That tranquility. "You earned it, Renata," she said. The girl smiled, picked up a flat stone from the river, and kept it in his backpack. "To remind me that I can be far away from everything," he explained. It was confirmation that he was no longer dependent on space physical to feel safe. Safety now was inside it. With the arrival of the end of the school year, the students were preparing a play about the dreams. Every child. I would choose a character that represented something I wanted to be or achieve. Renata chose to be the girl who transforms sad things into things beautiful, designed his own costume with scraps of shiny fabric, and in his scene transformed a chair old on a colorful stool. When he went up on stage and spoke his unique phrase, "Where it hurt before, now it hurts," flourishes, the audience whole saved silence before exploding in applause. Carolina, through tears, knew that this line was not just one part of the script. It was a profound truth born from the heart of a girl who had survived and transformed your pain in art. Later, while they were walking home, Renata took the river stone out of her backpack and gave it to Carolina. "Now, I want you to have it," he said, "because you helped me to find my peace of mind." Carolina held her in her hands like if it were gold. Never had such a simple object had so much courage. "Thank you, my love," he replied, in his voice trembling. "But that tranquility is yours, and it always will be," Renata insisted. "I want you to have it, so that you remember that you did something very big." Carolina hugged the girl tightly, while the sunset sun painted the streets of the neighborhood orange. I knew that moment would remain recorded forever, not in photos, neither in papers, but in the living memory of what they had built together. One story of courage, tenderness, and reparation. Shortly after, Carolina was invited to give a chat in a local university about his experience as teacher and adoptive mother. She was not one to talk in public, but accepted. He went up on stage with the notebook blue in hand and began saying, "I'm not an expert in laws, neither in psychology. I'm just a woman who decided listen to one little girl when he said it hurt, sit down." He told the story without details rough, but with honesty enough to make the whole room stay in silence. showed a photo of the bench Stella, spoke of the power of the drawings, of the phrases repeated, of love that is built with actions, small ones. When it was over, many came closer to thank you. Thank you for remind us that the children not always have voice to scream, but yes, to whisper, he told her, a student of pedagogy. That night, when she returned home, Renata was waiting for her with a paper crown and a layer made with a towel. "Today you are my heroine," he said. Carolina laughed, letting put on the crown and sat down in the sofa with solemnity pretended. "And what is my power?" he asked. Renata thought for a moment and replied, "You listen with the heart." Carolina closed eyes and hugged her daughter with strength. "And you have a power to convert the pain in stars," he whispered. It was an evening simple, without big events, but what would remain saved as one of the most important. Because in that small ritual between mother and daughter, both recognized that true love does not save magically, but accompanies enough as to not let anyone sink alone. With the time, the stool Stella. It stopped being just a symbol of resistance. It became in part of the house's welcoming ritual. Every time they received to someone new, a neighbor, a friend, even a distant cousin, Renata showed proud his corner favorite. "This is my little thinking stool," he would say, and sometimes he added, "Here I learned that it is possible return to start." Carolina watched her from the door, with a cup of tea in the hand and the full heart. It was impressive as a girl who had arrived at its life with fear even of sitting, now taught to others the value of calm, of thought, of refuge. Renata didn't need give long speeches. With his presence it was enough. One day, while ordered the shelves in the living room, Renata found a box with papers old, and among them was the temporary custody authorization that Carolina had received when all began. The girl read it carefully and asked, "Was this when you didn't know yet?" "Yeah." "Was I going to stay?" Carolina nodded in silence. "And you had afraid they were going to take me?" he insisted. "Very afraid," he replied. Renata came over, took her hand and said, "Me too. But now I no longer have fear because I know I'm not just passing through. I'm from here." That phrase, so simple and so powerful, gave Carolina a certainty new. Not only was there protected to a girl, there was built a home with it, one where the word punishment no longer existed, but space, listening and unconditional love. When Renata turned 8 years, chose celebrate with an outdoor snack, surrounded by flowers, colorful blankets, and her friends' close ones. He didn't ask for gifts, just that everyone they brought something done by they themselves. A drawing, a letter, a song. During the party, she read a poem that he had written in secret. He said, "Before I was a shadow afraid to speak. Now I am a girl who knows how to shine. It used to hurt feel in any place. Now I have stars to rest under." The applause was spontaneous. But the most important, it was the look that Carolina and Renata shared at that moment. A look that said, "We have come this far, together." As evening fell, while they collected the plates and wrapped the leftover cake, Carolina found Renata sitting alone in his bench, looking at the sky. "Are you okay?" she asked. "The girl." He nodded. "I was thinking in what I want do when I grow up," he said. "I want to have a house with many stools, one for each child who arrives with fear." Carolina knelt down forehead till she caressed his face and said, "If you do that, you're going to change the world." Renata smiled, looked down, and murmured, "You changed mine first." It was an instant serene, without drama, but with an emotional charge immense. Because it was not just about the present, but about a chain of affection that began to extend toward her future. And everything there was started with one phrase barely whispered, "If I sit, it hurts." One winter morning, Carolina received an official letter from the court. It was a notification of closure of the adoption process, now permanently archived. There was no more audiences, nor worker visits, nor evaluations earrings, just a piece of paper that said what both of them already knew it by heart: they were family. Carolina sat with Renata at the kitchen table, showed her the letter and said, "It's official. Although you were already my daughter from the first day." Renata did not celebrate with shouts nor jumps. He just walked over and hugged her from behind and whispered, "Thank you for to have me expected." Carolina felt that gesture. It closed a cycle, not of struggle, but of reconstruction. That weekend, they decided to do a last entry in her notebook blue. Renata wrote with her own lyrics, "Today we close this notebook, but not ours history. Now we continue without fear." Carolina added a note at the end, "Here ends the record, but life begins." Then together, they put it away in the time capsule they had armed years before. They buried him in a garden, right next to the largest sunflower large, with a stone painted in violet that said, "Never plus the chair." It was an act symbolic, but for them had the weight of an oath. That pain would no longer have space in his present. There was been named, confronted, transformed, and now, finally, buried. On dry land, under the promise that love could rewrite even the stories further hard. With the passing of the years, the stool Stella began to show signs of time. The paint has worn off, one of its legs has loosened, and the stars began to fade away. Renata, now 10 years, looked at him elate and said, "I think it's time to build another one." Carolina, surprised, asked him, "Yeah, wanted to replace it?" "Not replace it," the girl clarified. "Make a new one, a different one, because now I am different too." They searched together for the materials. They chose colors new, and this time, the stars were accompanied by suns, moons, and clouds. When finished, Renata painted it with a phrase. In her back, "Here I sit because I want, not because I have to learn something." It was a declaration of autonomy, a reflection of its growth. The old one bench was not discarded. Renata decided place it at school in a corner of the classroom with a sign that read, "Corner to think without fear." Her teacher, excited, accepted, enchanted. Soon, others' children. They started using it, not like punishment, but as space of rest, of pause, of containment. Renata observed in silence. When someone was sitting down there, never asked by what they did, he just came closer after and said, "If you need company, here I am." Carolina, seeing that, he understood that his daughter had not only healed, had taken what was lived and had it turned in a tool to care for two others. And in that act, without knowing it, he became in a small guide for those who also needed rebuild from love. One day, Carolina went summoned again by the university, this time to participate in a round table on education and childhood trauma. Renata asked accompany her. She was no longer the little girl silent that was hiding behind his teacher, but a preteen sure, with a look firm and voice clear. During the event, they offered him do a question at the end. Renata stood up, took her microphone and said, "Why don't we teach from small that words can also save lives?" The room was left in silence. The moderator, visibly moved, she replied, "You have reason, and you are not doing it today, teaching." Carolina said nothing, but in his chest exploded a mixture of pride and amazement. Renata was transforming his history in tool. I was sowing hope with each phrase. That night, while we're returning in her car, Renata said something that Carolina would not forget never. "Sometimes I think my story. It started badly, but term in he place correct." Carolina looked at her tenderly. "It didn't end," she corrected. "Hardly this starting. And now you have the reins." Renata smiled, leaned back in the seat and closed eyes. For the rest of the trip, Carolina thought in everything they had crossed, in every step, every fall, each scar and every healing word. The path had not been easy, but they had journeyed together. And now, with the horizon further clear, they knew the worst there was left back. What was coming by in front was a life built with truth, respect, and a kind of love that doesn't need promises. It is tested every day in the gestures simpler. The relationship between Renata and Carolina became each time further solid, but also more horizontal. It was no longer just a little girl being cared for by an adult, was a teenager in training, with opinions, own ideas, and a look criticism about her world. One day, in the middle of a conversation about justice and rights, Renata said, "I want to be a lawyer, not to punish, but to protect." Carolina became emotional. "Do you would like to defend others' children as you?" he asked. "Yes," he replied, "but I also want to teach the adults as really listen." That phrase was left resonating in Carolina for days, because it wasn't just a dream vocational, it was the reflection of a personal history turned in purpose. Renata had accomplished take his wound deeper and transform it in compass. Meanwhile, the original bench remained at school. There was been repaired twice, repainted one, but maintained his essence. And some students knew they asked by that had stars, because was first place where a little girl learned that not everything, it has to hurt, they explained. The teachers, it was part of the living history of the classroom. Each generation cared for it as if it were a treasure. Renata visited it from time to time, and when I gently cleaned it and left it a small note in its interior. Phrases like, "You are safe," "Breathe without fear," or "Nobody can take off you" voice. Those notes, anonymous, became a secret ritual among the children, and although not all they knew who left them, the effect was always the same. One feeling of comfort that came fair when more was needed. To the 12 years, Renata was invited to participate in a day on children's rights, organized by a local NGO. He enthusiastically accepted and decided to carry with him a replica of his stool, Stella. During his intervention, he did not speak of suffering, but of resilience. "I am not here not to tell what happened to me, but to say that it can be done. Go out forward, someone tea. Listen in time," he said to a room full of teachers, psychologists, and families. At the end of his presentation, various attendees approached to hug her, congratulate her, and thank her. A social worker commented, "I wish all the children had a Carolina in their lives." Renata smiled and replied, "And I hope all the adults learn to see in time." That night, Carolina and Renata returned home in silence, tired but happy. Upon arrival, Renata was straight to the garden and sat down in a new bench, the one they had built years back with suns, moons, and clouds. Carolina watched her from the door. The girl who one day could not sit without shaking, now he did it with serenity, contemplating the night. "In what are you thinking about?" he asked. "About everything that's coming," Renata replied. "About what I'm going to build, about the children who have not yet been heard, in the stars that have not yet born." Carolina came over and sat down at her side. There was nothing more to add, because sometimes the true victory does not need fires artificial. Just look at the person you love sitting in peace, dreaming without fear, and knowing that now never further will live again reserved. At school, secondary school, Renata was chosen delegate of his course, not because it was the most extroverted, but because all they trusted in his ability to listen and mediate. When someone buddy she was going through a bad time, she didn't insist in advice, just sit at his side and said, "I am here." His presence had converted in a shelter silent, like that first bench Stella that there was changed his life. Even the teachers recognized his maturity. "He has a sensitivity that is not taught in books," he said one of them in a meeting pedagogical. Renata knew this, but she didn't use it to excel. She used it to accompany. One day, a first-year girl approached to she crying, trembling, powerless, explain much. Renata didn't ask anything at first. She led her to the library's relaxation corner, a space with cushions and dim lighting, and they sat together. After a while, the girl, he said, "I'm scared. Go home." Renata breathed, deep. "It used to happen to me too, but now we're talking." And that is the first step. That same late activated his school protection protocol, accompanied the minor with the social worker, and more late let an anonymous note in his box. "Your pain is not a secret. Your voice, it matters. I'm with you." Carolina, upon learning of this, said nothing. A lot, just caressed the face of his daughter and said to her, "You did not come out of pain to forget it. You came out to reach out to someone still this inside." At 16 years, Renata began to write a book. It was not an autobiography direct, but a novel inspired. In his story, the protagonist was a little girl called Alma, who spoke to the stars and kept secret words in glass jars. In each chapter, Alma discovered a truth, a fear, a hope. Carolina read the drafts carefully, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a serene smile. "You are telling what you experienced without it hurting to read it," he said one day. Renata replied, "Because it doesn't hurt to remember it anymore. It just drives me on." The book became in a project shared. It was corrected between snacks, walks through He Park and nights long. They didn't know if they would publish it someday, but that didn't matter. They wrote it to heal and sow. One summer afternoon, while reorganized He closet, Renata found a box forgotten. Inside was the time capsule they had buried toward years. They decided open it together, sitting under the tree old garden. They took out a notebook blue, the drawings, notes, and for a moment, silence covered him, everything. Renata read some phrases in voice high and then said, "That girl, I'm not me anymore, but I appreciate that you have resisted." Carolina, moved, responded, "And I thank you to have me chosen to accompany her." They saved again everything, but this maybe they didn't bury him. They placed him in a shelf between the books. Further important, "It's not to hide," Renata said. "It's to remember where come each time you doubt where to go." In his last year of high school, Renata was invited to speak in a conference national about childhood and resilience. In front of an audience packed with experts, educators, and young people, he took the stage without notes. He began saying, "We don't come broken, we are broken, but we can also choose as us we return to put together." He spoke of his little bench, from Carolina, from sleepless nights, and the power of a voice believed in time. When he finished, there was a long-standing ovation. Some cried, others simply nodded in silence. Renata was not looking for recognition, just sowing the certainty that it is always possible rebuild. That night, Carolina hugged her tightly and said, "You are living proof that love can more than any shadow." Shortly after he received a letter of admission to law school. There was been accepted with a scholarship complete. Renata cried when she read it, not only because of what it meant, but by everything there was crossed to arrive there. Carolina, in tears, gave him a gift, a small replica of the stool Stella carved in wood with stars silver. "So that never forget who you are, and that still sitting in the places further difficult, you can continue being you." Renata hugged him as if it were the final piece of a puzzle. It wasn't just an object, it was a symbol, one that said, "I'm not running away anymore. Now I belong." The day before moving to college, Renata sat down a last time in his original stool, the first one, already aged but intact. Carolina came over and sat next to she. "Ready to start this new stage?" she asked. Renata nodded. "I'm ready, because I had a place where heal first," he replied. They stayed in silence, looking the garden they had built together, that little one shelter full of flowers, stones with messages, and memories in each corner. It wasn't a tearful goodbye. It was a soft celebration, like he closing a book read with love. Renata promised return each time I needed remember who he was, and Carolina, without saying it, knew that her mission was fulfilled. The next day, before leaving, Renata left a note stuck on the fridge. It said, "Thanks for change the chair for a stool. Thanks for stay. Thank you for listen to me when I could only whisper." Carolina read it after closing the door and allowed himself cry, not from sadness, but from fullness. There was, walked alongside a little girl broken, and now I saw her. To leave as a whole woman. In her last drawing, Renata painted a room bright, with windows open, a color bank, and a woman laughing with her. Above she wrote, "My new place to think," and Carolina, closing finally the notebook blue. He knew he had complimented his promise, that Chair read never further, it would hurt no one again. They passed the months, and although Renata was far physically, never stopped sending messages, photos and fragments of your book. In each mail, in each call, and always there was a phrase, a word, a wink that I remembered his root. One day he wrote, "Today I defended a child in a mock legal practice. When I finished, I felt like I was taking care of the Renata from before." Carolina read that message with the heart overwhelmed. I knew that young lawyer in training was not only there bran his own history, but now worked to save many others. The echo of that girl who one day said, "It hurts, sit down," now became in, voice for those who could not yet talk. And so, in a house that still preserves his stool Stella next to the sunflower old man of the garden, Carolina continues taking care of the flowers, reading his notebook blue from time to time in when, and waiting for the visits of a daughter who transformed the pain in purpose. Renata's story was not written with perfect ink, but with scars, courage, and persistent love. And although her world sometimes it seems indifferent, she demonstrated that, with a single voice listened to in time, a single hand extended firmly can break a cycle whole. Because there are children who scream and cannot be heard, but there are others who whisper. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone listen. Did you make it this far? Then this message is for you. Subscribe, comment, and share. Your support keeps this mission alive.